Joining us now from ESPN, from NFL Live, from your television, it is Dan Orlovsky. Dan, how you doing, man?
Buddy, I'm doing fantastic. How about yourself, man?
Doing very well. Yeah, we're getting to the end of OTAs here. Obviously, this is the time in the calendar where everyone's going to take a little bit of a break for the next 4, 5, 6 weeks. We are not going to take that break. There's still plenty to talk about. And I wanted to have you on because, we've had this conversation in several different forms over the last couple months as you do your off-season content, your quarterback lists, your rankings, and you kind of take stock of the position overall. And two guys that I think, really since we started this show, have gotten a lot of quick love, right? And when we talk about them or think about them, it's like, oh yeah, that guy's great. That guy's great. And you almost do it without thinking. And that's Dak Prescott and Trevor Lawrence. And I wanted to have you on because I think you've been somebody who's been a little bit quicker to tap the brakes on paying both of those guys at this point for a few different reasons. So, and it's nice to have some dissenting opinions every once in a while and kind of look at this stuff from a slightly different angle. So let's start with Dak. I remember I think it was in March, post the first wave of free agency, where you said that if you were in Dallas's position, if you were Jerry Jones, if you were Will McClay, you're running that team, you would have blown the whole thing up after last season. So that indicates to me that you are maybe not in favor of giving Dak a close to top of the market extension before this season begins. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, that's fair. Robert, it goes back for me to when Dak's first contract the first big one was going to get done and the timing of it. And, people misconstrue like what my stance on Dak was then and probably a little bit now. Like I've always believed Dak Prescott, good player at worst. And he's had moments of being really good player. And, when his contract was going on, and I understand that there's you pay him what the market says to pay him world. I'm aware of all of that. But I was kind of, I guess, gathered or gained traction when I said you never pay a good player, great player money. And obviously Dallas paid Dak Prescott a lot of money. And I kind of have a very similar viewpoint of where things are right now is, Dak in his last 2 years, one really good, one really bad. And in both those situations, like in many ways, just dud playoff performances outside of the Tampa game. And I think you and I the Tampa game was probably one of the easier games he's ever played as a pro. So just dud playoff performances. And I think for Dallas, you have to take stock and say, okay, he's good. And we have moments of really good with a pretty darn healthy and good roster. I understand the alternative of, well, if it's not him, who? But that doesn't just mean I'm paying you $50 million.
I'm curious, and you'll understand why I'm asking this as we kind of get to the next point here. How much of a gap do you see between Dak and Kirk Cousins?
I mean, not much. You try to take the players as individual pieces, which is really tough to do when you're evaluating that spot because it is so dependent on who and what, who you're with and what you're doing. I would claim that Kirk has probably in Minnesota been in better and more favorable situations in both of those questions. He's probably had better people around him, specifically Justin, although CD's very good, and then the scheme of the offense. So, I don't think that they're all that different players. Both those guys are relatively I don't want to say the same person, but very similar to me.
I think we can kind of hem and haw about where the gaps are between them. I would say that especially last year, Dak is making more plays out of structure. He's able to do a little bit more stuff when the play breaks down. He's able to operate outside of the pocket a little bit more. I think that some of the stuff protection-wise that Dak does before the snap, just because they give him the freedom to do it, he has more autonomy than somebody like Kirk has at the line of scrimmage. But those are marginal things that we're talking about. The reason that I ask that is because, and also Kirk is, I think, 4 years older. So those are kind of the differences to me. The reason I ask is because the Vikings kind of did this, right? What the Vikings have done over the last year is they looked at somebody who was between the 8th to 13th best quarterback in the league, and they said, you know what? Paying that guy, if not top of the market money, then one step down from that, that is not the path for us to become a championship caliber team. That amount that we're allocating to the quarterback is going to hold us back from paying our own players and from being able to build a complete enough roster around our stars like Justin Jefferson. So we're going to choose to move on from Kirk. And essentially, if the Cowboys do this, if they stick to their guns, if they do not blink and they walk away from Dak at the end of the year, it's a similar situation. You're going to have CD at top of the market money. You're going to have Micah at top of the market money. You got a couple offensive linemen that you're going to have to pay. You paid a couple corners. And now, theoretically, you could drop a rookie quarterback contract into that, but you'd have to maneuver to get one in the same way that the Vikings did. So it's not as if this is a dissimilar situation than some of the other ones we've seen in the past and kind of these tough choices that teams have to make with this type of quarterback.
In many ways, it's a organizational philosophy. There are organizations that I truly believe are content with, hey, we have good quarterback. We're going to pay him probably more than he's worth. And we know that our roster is not going to be healthy or good enough to elevate him to a NFC or AFC championship caliber QB, but we're going to have the chance to win a good amount of games and our jobs are going to be safe. And there's that organizational philosophy. If he gets hot or if we hit on a 4th round pick or something, that's when you have a chance to go on a run. And then there's organizations who just sit there and go, we believe that unless you get a difference maker, a win because of an elite, a top 5 quarterback, you have no shot at truly going and winning the whole thing. I think that's what we saw years ago when Buffalo went up and got Josh, or the Kansas City Chiefs went up and got Patrick. Was they were sitting there going, we got good, and in Alex and I think it was Tyrod, but we need great. And it's just the organizational philosophy. And there's always the fine line. Dallas and Minnesota are the perfect examples of, hey, obviously Dallas has had a ton of regular season success. Is we're going to be really good. And it's if we could get hot for 2 or 3 weeks with Dak Prescott, we can go to the NFC Championship. That is truth. But you're constantly having to hold your breath on that if, when you're them. I don't think anybody thinks that way, at least future-wise, about the Green Bay Packers. Everyone's sitting there going, I would be very surprised if they're not in an NFC Championship game within the next couple of years, or if that young man's not playing for a Super Bowl championship, or at least in that conversation. And I just don't believe that Dallas, I don't think that Dallas is in a place where they have either of those answers right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember talking to someone in the Minnesota building about Kirk when they were still kind of attached to Kirk before the 2023 season. And I was asking them about that sort of idea. It's like, okay, how does this guy get you to the end of the road? How does this guy get you to a Lombardi trophy? And the framing was kind of similar to what happened with Matthew Stafford in LA. And I think this is kind of unfair to Matthew Stafford, but it was, okay, you have blue chip quarterbacks or you have a red chip quarterback with blue moments. And if you have enough of those blue moments in the playoffs, you can get there, even if it's an imperfect quarterback and an imperfect team. I think in the couple of years since, I've come to think of Matthew Stafford as a slightly different level than these guys in terms of overall ability, but I understand that thought process. The problem with that thought process is that's a narrow window that you're living in. You have to thread a needle that's really, really hard to thread. So I get it if you're a coach talking yourself into that path. But at the same time, I think you have to be honest with yourself about how difficult it is to follow that path when you're having to beat Patrick Mahomes at the end of all
and
of
you're
this.
trying to strike lightning, essentially, because you're also you're betting on or banking or crossing your fingers that red chip quarterback has those blue moments, and he doesn't run into a blue chip quarterback having blue moments, and
so, they typically are there in the playoffs.
Exactly. And so I think that's kind of where you sit with Dallas. And it's because, Robert, if you had asked me this conversation, which is oddly enough that I feel this way, and you had used Jared Goff instead of Kirk Cousins, I think in my gut, I would probably tell you, Dak Prescott might be a more talented player than Jared Goff. And I probably have a better viewpoint of Jared than some people. And when he's clean, he could throw it as good as anybody. But then the flip side is, when Jared's gone to a Super Bowl, Jared's gone to an NFC Championship game. I understand there's variables attached to that when it means he was Sean McVay. He was in, Detroit with Ben Johnson, one of the best offensive lines in football. And it's just, I think, with these situations, if you're the Detroit Lions, you sit there and go, well, we expect Jared Goff to lead us back to an NFC championship game again. And maybe the conversation is different in 2 years, that his salary will be so much more expensive. It's not perfect for these situations. That's the hard part for these organizations, is when they know they have a good quarterback, you have to pay him more if you are content with being good.
The thing is with Jared Goff is that this is a different part in the trajectory of the Lions franchise. Even if you're looking at a spreadsheet, I can understand landing on Jared Goff at $53 million is not great value. But sometimes you skimp on the value when you're growing, you're building, when he's been a part of that, when he's been a central part of your culture. The Lions' arrow is pointed up. Theoretically, it should be. The Cowboys, it feels like we're getting to the end of something rather than being at the beginning of something. And that's why I think it's a little bit different. And on the other side of this, Jared Goff, even if it's $53 million, I think that we have to start talking about this stuff more as a percentage of the cap than a single number.
Sure, because it's growing.
Jared Goff, and his number right now at $53 million is 20.75% of the salary cap. I don't think Dak would take $53 million a year. I think he would want something that was more in line with the top of the market and the way that he's negotiated in the past. And if you're going at the top of the market in terms of percentage of the cap, Joe Burrow was at 24.47 when he got his deal. 24.47% of the current salary cap is $64 million a year. That's not what Jared Goff is making. So that's my question, is what is Dak going to want? Because if he wanted Jared Goff money, I'd probably be inclined to give it to him. But everything about the way that they've negotiated in the past leads me to believe that he's not going to want that.
Robert, real quick, what is Kirk Cousins percentage-wise of the cap? Because that's a great point, is sitting there going, because Dak's also really smart, and so are his people. Dak knows he's going to get a gajillion dollars, whether it's from the Dallas Cowboys or somebody else. He just watched the guy that is relatively comparable, and Kirk, go get $100 million plus guaranteed and $180 million deal. So if you're that party, you're sitting there going, well, I don't need to bend the knee to you organizationally. And if you're the organization, and that's why at the end of the season, after the loss, I'd said, you can't make the decision coming off of this season and looking at the success of this season. I would have been looking into the foresight and the future and saying, I'm just going to have to run into these almost impossible decisions within the next year for the Dallas Cowboys. And now in many ways, they're stuck.
Yeah. The Kirk number is 17.6% of the cap. So it is a significant step down from those guys that are at the top. But again, if I'm Dak's people, I'm negotiating from a different place, and he's 4 years younger and has played at an MVP level as recently as last year. Kirk is 35 coming off an Achilles getting that contract. So even if their play on the field, and I do think Dak is better, but even if their play on the field puts him in a similar tier, I think that you can make a strong argument for why Dak deserves more money. I'm curious on your side of this. What do you think it is specifically about Dak as a quarterback that is kind of holding you back from just saying, yeah, write the check? I think he's one of those guys.
Yeah, I don't believe it's probably two ways. I don't believe that when the team has needed him to go be great in big games, like difference maker, that some of those handful of quarterbacks that we've seen be, I don't think that I have a ton of evidence of him being that. Specifically, yes, in the playoffs. I think 3 out of his last 4 playoff games, he just has not performed. And I understand 2 of them are against really good defenses in San Francisco. But if I'm paying 20+% of the salary cap, my expectation is that, we win those games because of you. And that's what's holding me back. I've always believed he was a good player. I just never have believed that you're going to cost me $10 more million than I want to spend, but you'll make up for it when it matters the most with your play. And I know that there's only 5 or 6 guys in the NFL that are those guys. That's what my holdup is on them.
Yeah, but I think that if there are 5 or 6 guys like that, But there are a bunch of other guys, 5 or 6 typically in any given time, that are on those rookie quarterback contracts that allows you to build the sort of team where you can potentially go toe-to-toe with those 5 or 6 guys that are waiting for you in the playoffs. That's the other path here. That's the path that the Vikings took, and it's the path that several other teams have taken to pretty good effect recently. My thing with Dak is I'm fine with moving on from him as a practical exercise where you're sitting back and saying, what is our best path? I just think, and I've said this a bunch of times over the course of this spring, I would try to get something for him because the idea of him walking away for nothing is so difficult to stomach because you're probably going to be in a place, and I think you're even further down on them than most people are. But let's say in a pessimistic world, they win 8 or 9 games this year. You're picking 16th, 17th, and it's going to be really hard for you to find your next guy. If you had gone to Dak as this offseason started and said, hey, we both know that this has probably run its course. Why don't we figure out a solution here? And you could get a first or you could get something for him and you could walk into next year's draft with a little bit more ammunition. That off-ramp is a lot easier to navigate than the way that you're trying to do it right now.
And it's justified, and that's, Robert, this is exactly why I said what I said. It wasn't this hate train on Mike McCarthy or Dak Prescott. It was just the reality of looking at the situation being like, and there was some disappointment, obviously, in the way that it ended, even for me as a person who's, my job is you're going, this happened again in this fashion. And I know that there's a no trade clause, but when business is business, if you're the organization and you go to him and say, well, unless something changes dramatically, this is going to be our plan. How do we, and I know it's never as easy as I'm sometimes making it sound, but how do we make this work for you, but for us, because this is the end result? Because here, just spinning it forward, Robert. All right, so this team is this team at the end of November is let's call it a 10-3 or something like that. You're not 10-3 because your quarterback's playing bad. Okay, so then if you're the Cowboys, you're preparing for your quarterback to ask for $65+ million a year from you. So you are either going to then have to rerun this cycle that you are just going through now, or exactly what you're saying is he's going to walk coming off of another really good season, and you're going to get nothing for him.
The last thing I'll ask you about this, let's say they do move on. Let's say he walks at the end of the year for whatever reason, either because they don't want to meet his price or because they fell a little bit short. Your CeeDee Lamb or your Tyler Smith, your Micah Parsons, and your organization is willing to walk away from a guy that has played really good football over the last couple of years in stretches and has been the face of your franchise in a lot of ways. How do you think the locker room responds to something like that?
I always say that the locker room, the response will be whatever the relationship is with those guys, truly. I think we all believe that he's got great relationships with inside that locker room. You don't really hear anything differently. So if that is the case, you're going to have a locker room, whether they believe business is business, you're going to have a locker room that's going to be upset. You're going to have a locker room that's going to be disappointed. You're going to have a locker room that's going to be asking your organization and its leadership a lot of questions of, one, well, who's going to be the person who leads us at that position in the future? And then two, if he played the way he did and handled himself the way he did and represented us the way he did, why is he not here? And you're going to have a lot of questions from a lot of really important players. If that friendship and relationship is what we kind of believe it is, then you're going to have a lot of questions on your hands.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating how it plays out because let's say they do decide to not pay him and they're dealing with a rookie quarterback contract or they're skimping at the position. Even after they pay Parsons, even after they pay Tyler Smith, even after they pay CeeDee, like the Vikings, they're still going to have a lot of money to throw around potentially if they end up going the young, cheap quarterback route. The difference is this team has shown no willingness to be aggressive on the open market over the past few years. And that might be a product of paying your quarterback as much money as they have, and they don't have the financial flexibility necessarily, but we've never seen them operate in that sort of world because think of the modern Dallas Cowboys. They went from Tony Romo to Dak Prescott, and they had a certain level of quarterback and a certain level of expense at quarterback since I've been paying attention to them in this sort of job. So it would be such a bizarre experience to kind of see them on the other side of it. But if they move on from him, that's where they would be.
Yeah. And the other element attached to this is organizationally and publicly, there will be high expectations for this football team this year. 12 wins, 3 years in a row. I do not believe it's a 12-win roster. I just don't. But we all know who that'll get pinned on. It'll be the quarterback's not playing good enough. And then you're sitting there, as a organization and a football team having a lot of success, but nothing to show for it.